The group walked along the path under Umpty's guide. After about an hour after passing the last group of ghouls, they could finally see the top of the promised fortress over a hill. Ben quickened his pace, pulling ahead of the group to reach the top of the hill and get a better look. His ears lowered at the pitiful sight. The fort itself wasn't much of a spectacle. It was much smaller than he'd expected. The old walls had crumbled in places, the single watchtower was falling apart, and the entire structure was covered in vines and foliage. It had been completely abandoned and left to decay. The group caught up to him and saw the state of what was supposed to be a safe place to take shelter. Ben stormed over and confronted Umpty. "What the hell is this? You said this place would be fortified and safe, but it's falling apart at the seams. How is anyone supposed to take refuge in there?" Umpty stepped past the howling wolf and spoke over his shoulder. "The fortress itself is in shambles, yes, but the majority of the actual fort is underground. That part is sure to hold firm. There's enough space in there to hold all of us and more." Blick stomped forward, running a hand through his beard. Why would this fortress have such a bunker? Surely not for supplies. Umpty faced away. Yes, for supplies, and weapons, and bunks, and an underground training area, and blacksmith to keep both the soldiers and their weapons honed. Bah! It sounds like you have a whole dwarf colony under that place. Thank heavens we don't. Blick huffed and went back to the wagon. Ben approached Umpty. That all sounds a little far-fetched. How could all of that be under the fortress without it collapsing under the main building's weight? Then he remembered what Umpty had when they first met. Is it because of that pixie dust stuff? Like what you had when you made that bridge fly away? Umpty tilted his head. Sort of. It's mostly an old enchantment the royal wizard put on the structure. The magic, he claimed, would last for centuries. He walked away toward the fort. Ben ran a hand over his head and pinched his ear. He already knew something wasn't right about Umpty's claims. Now he stood even more suspicious. He'd not ever heard of a royal wizard, or any wizard in the kingdom for that matter. Now, there was suddenly an underground bunker beneath the fortress that was being held up with magic from said wizard. Everyone else seemed convinced enough to take Umpty's word as they walked past Ben. Ben followed the wagon closely. Something still didn't feel right about this place. His instincts kept kicking in, making his ear itch furiously. The closer he got to that building, the worse it got. Something was in there. The wolf rushed ahead of the group and ushered them to stop. "Hang on, someone should go check if it's safe to go in there." "Safe?" Blick blubbered. "Safe's the reason we be heading in there." "Yeah, but..." Ben's mind fumbled for an excuse. Is this structure really safe? Loose bricks might fall on us, or there could be ghouls trapped inside. You never know. I'll head in and make sure it's clear for all of us. Blick straightened up with a grunt. "Then I'll be heading in with you, lad. I've been fixing for more action than those scattered fellows along the road." He held up his mining hammer. "Besides, you shouldn't go alone where there may be a group of trouble." Ben welcomed the dwarf's company. Then he noticed Red stepping away from the wagon and walked over to confront her. "Red, I'm going to need you to stay here. I promise you, I'll be back." The little one shook her head, seemingly adamant about following Ben wherever he went. Ben lowered the girl's hood to get a better look at her face. "Red, I will come back. You've seen me fight. I can take care of myself. I even killed a really big one when I met Avery." He knelt down to meet her at eye level. "I'll be fine. Now, can you be brave and wait here for me?" After a moment, Red responded with a meek nod and walked back to the wagon. Marge reached out and beckoned her closer to where she and Avery stood with the other children. Ben could feel her watching him as he walked away with his spear in hand. "That was some grand negotiation there, lad," Blick commented, walking beside him. "But what's this about killing a big ghoul back when you met Avery? Where was I during that?" Ben laughed. "It wasn't much to talk about, Blick." "Bollocks. I'd have loved to be a part of that fight. How'd you manage it on your own?" "Didn't do much, really. I just pushed the heavy oaf into a nearby river, and it sank like a stone." Blick sighed in disappointment. That's it? That was hardly a glorious fight, lad. I still killed him. Ben smirked, imagining his father's ghoulish face sitting lifeless at the bottom of the river. Right where the bastard belonged. If I were there, the fight would be long, drawn out, and glorious, the dwarf boasted, holding his hammer above his head. And you'd risk turning into a ghoul yourself if you went toe-to-toe with him. My father, despite how he died, was no pushover. Blick shot Ben a wide-eyed glare. It was your father. Yes, and he got what was coming to him. They both reached the fort's front gate. The large wooden blockade stood partially ajar, just enough for them to squeeze in through. Ben walked in first, spear at the ready. His ear still itched furiously. He didn't hear, nor smell, any ghouls nearby. He glanced up and didn't see any loose bricks in the high walls worth notice. So, what was his danger instinct warning him about? Blick bolted past him. Get a move on, lad. The fight's not going to wait forever. Blick, I'm not sure there's going to be a fight here. There will be soon, if one of them ghouls shows up. Ben wandered around the fortress yard. The place wasn't particularly large, more of an outpost than a complete fortress. The four walls of the place surrounded a central building with a watchtower in one corner. The doors to the building had been broken down, like something was trying to get in. Be careful here, he warned the dwarf. Blick scoffed, clearly more interested in facing whatever caused that damage than exercising caution. They both crept into the building. The place had been completely wrecked. Broken bits of furniture lay everywhere, scraps of paper littered the floor, and the metallic odor of dried blood filled the air. This wouldn't be the best place to bring children, but given the circumstances, there was little choice. The sound of scrapes and thuds rose from below their feet. Something moved in the chambers below them. Blick grinned, his teeth showing past his beard. Ben grabbed his arm. Don't just go charging in there. We don't know what it is. The two moved forward more slowly. They found their way to a stairwell at the far end of the building. The air downstairs was cold and the smell of blood was much more prominent. Strangely, there were no bodies. The sounds of high-pitched grunting punctuated with sharp squeals came from one of the rooms down the dark hallway. Bah! And me without a lantern! Blick shouted. Ben quickly shushed him, but it was too late. Whatever ghoul was down there, it heard him and was squealing furiously. Is it a pig? Then this should be holy. Blick and Ben reeled backward when the ghoul came out of the darkness, hobbling on uneven legs. It was a pig, all right, or rather 3 in 1. It was a singular ghoul, but it had the heads of 3 distinct pigs shoved together on the same neck, and every other part of its body was horribly mismatched. Ben and Blick quickly rushed back upstairs, the squealing abomination following close behind. Out in the open, they turned back to face it in broad daylight. The thing was just as hideous in daylight as it was in the darkness. Bleeding hell, how did this happen? Blick retched as he stared at the monster before them. How should I know? Ben yelled back. Just kill it! He lowered his spear to meet the charging swine. As one of its heads ran into the end of his spear, he recognized the faces of the pigs on the ghoul. They were the same 3 brothers whose homes he terrorized years ago. Something on the necks of this abomination caught Ben's eye, which told him something incredibly disturbing. Blick jumped in with his hammer and smashed one of the heads in with the blunt end. The pig screamed as it reeled, stumbling on one foot as the other had gone limp. Ben pulled his spear back and lunged forward to finish off the 3rd head, killing the half-rotten swine. With the 3-headed ghoul lying dead on the ground, Ben collapsed to the floor and shuffled backward. The foul odor of the pig thing's blood bothered him just as much as that of every other ghoul he'd faced. Now that was a fight! Blick hollered, flailing his hammer over his head in triumph. I wouldn't celebrate yet, Ben groaned. Come look at this. He pointed to a line of harsh stitching that connected 2 of the heads to the body. Eh? Blick walked closer and leaned down to look. What's all that about? The ghouls don't seem dexterous enough to pull off any sort of sewing job, which means this. He kicked the 3-headed remains. was deliberate. Someone made them this way.